The Last Line is a completely free podcast, but takes a lot of time, effort, and hard work to make happen. So if you'd like to support the show, then please head over to patreon.com/The Last Line. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time you're listening to this podcast. My name is James Alban and you are listening to episode 16 of The Last Line. Thank you very much for joining me. Excuse my the cold that I have. It's making my nasally voice even more nasally, so you're welcome. On this week's episode of the podcast, I talk to none other than science writer, skeptical investigator, conspiracy debunker, Mick West. Mick does a nice job at the start of our interview of explaining who he is, some of his background, so I will be brief here. But just to point out that in 2018, Mick authored the book Escaping the Rabbit Hole, How to Debunk Conspiracy Theories Using Facts, Logic and Respect. That had the goal of helping people understand and explain conspiracy theories and then pass those explanations on to others. And in April of 2019, he started a podcast called Tales from the Rabbit Hole, which at the time of recording this is up to episode 25. So he's already put out more episodes than I have. In the space of a few months. So, I need to up my game. In which he interviews people involved in conspiracy culture. Some people who are deep in it, and some people who have gotten out of it. But every time, it's a pretty interesting conversation. Mick is a very sort of open-minded individual, very respectful towards his guests, and you'll hear us sort of talking about that approach later on in the show. So, without further ado, here is Mick West.
I got into video games back when I lived in the UK, like in the 80s, and just kind of slacked off a lot at university. And when I left university, my only saleable skill was making video games. So I got a job making video games. I worked at Ocean in Manchester. Then I moved to the States a few years later and started my own company after a while with a couple of other people. And we did a game called Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, which was very, very popular. And it made enough money so that after working in the video games industry for a couple of decades, I was able to retire and pursue my own interests. And after I left the video game industry, I started doing some writing. I wrote for a Game Developer magazine, and I was doing some freelance work. And I got interested in a couple of things. One of them was flying. I'd always been really interested in flying, so I wanted to learn how to fly. So I started taking flying lessons. And the other one was blogging. I wanted to start my own blog just to write about things. I just enjoy writing about things. And these two things kind of collided when I discovered the chemtrails conspiracy theory, which is the theory that the government is spraying stuff out of the back of planes, leaving these long white trails in the sky, which are some kind of climate-altering toxins. And so I thought I'd write a quick blog about the chemtrails conspiracy theory and explaining that these trails people were seeing were just contrails. And so I did that starting, I think, in 2006 was the first post that I did. And that's, obviously like 13 years ago now. And the chemtrails theory is still going strong. I didn't manage to debunk the chemtrails theory, but I did do a lot of interesting stuff came out of that. I got on a show with Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan Questions Everything was a TV show he had back then. I went on the Joe Rogan podcast a few times, and I started my own forum called Debunk, which is a much broader based forum for debunking and investigating all kinds of conspiracy theories and dubious claims. Like we even do stuff like UFOs and the paranormal, as well as the more normal kind of 9/11 and chemtrails and flat Earth type stuff. And I've just launched a podcast.
I just listened to the first episode, actually. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, Tales from the Rabbit Hole. It's a conversation podcast, kind of like this one, but I want to focus on talking to people who were involved in the conspiracy culture, like people who were conspiracy theorists, or like they still are conspiracy theorists, or they're just really they're debunkers or investigators or whatever. So that's just getting off the ground, and so that's where I am now.
I just listened to the first episode of that. And I think it's really interesting listening to someone who, because I'm not. It's interesting you said that you listened to a bit of the podcast I did with David and I, where we sort of talk about conspiracy theories, and I'm not a conspiracy theory sort of believer at all, really. I mean, there are obviously, presumably, there are some conspiracies that are true, like the obvious ones that we know about, like Watergate and all that kind of stuff. There are obvious conspiracies, but in terms of like being a general skeptic, I'm more on that side than. But it's really interesting to hear someone who was sort of really deep in it, sort of has come out the other side and is now not there anymore. How's that been for you in terms of? I guess you've probably met a lot of people like that before, anyway, but.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating, really. And when I was working on my book, Escaping the Rabbit Hole, that was all about people who used to be in that situation and now are not, and how did they get out of it? And they all had, the stories are all different, obviously, because they're all different people and they were in different conspiracy theories. I tried to pick like one from each of the four main ones that I focused on. But they all had kind of some similarities. They all kind of fell into it, kind of by being exposed to information. The most typical route now that people take, is that they watch a video on YouTube, and the videos that you see on YouTube for conspiracy theories can be very, very compelling. A lot of people cite very specific YouTube videos that were the ones that kind of opened their eyes, red-pilled them, and got them into conspiracy theories, like with 9/11. There's one called Loose Change, and there's another one called Zeitgeist. And similar movies, YouTube videos like that are quite well produced and make a compelling case because they're only presenting one side of an argument. It's very easy to make a compelling case if you only have to present one side of the argument. And then they get hooked because they have no real frame of reference for looking at these things. They haven't really been reading about conspiracy theories, or they haven't really read about the facts of the case that they're interested in, like the whole, 9/11. And so they're kind of a blank slate to start off with. And they get presented with this alternative viewpoint from, the vague understanding that they have from the mainstream media or whatever they've done. Often they have no real frame of reference at all because they're young people and they're just ready to soak something up. How young people kind of get really into things, teenagers especially, but even people in their early to mid late 20s. They're very susceptible. They're very. It's very easy for them to get sucked into something new if it sounds like it's correct, and once they believe it's correct, they often will just try to seek out information that supports that. And so they kind of go down the rabbit hole. And this is something I saw with all the people that I talked to. And it was something with John, the guy that you listened to in the first episode. He started out listening to Glenn Beck. And if all you do is listen to Glenn Beck, or if you listen to Sean Hannity or someone who's just pushing a particular point of view, or if you just listen to Rachel Maddow, who's a commentator here, like a liberal commentator in the States, if you just listen to one point of view, then you tend to be aligned with that point of view. So if you just listen to Alex Jones, or if you just listen to Glenn Beck, then you're eventually going to start agreeing with them. You'll start nodding when they say certain things, like Obama is trying to overthrow the government. If you say that enough times and you put all this evidence forward, then people are going to get sucked in and they're going to start believing it. So that was fascinating, just seeing how people get drawn into these conspiracy theories in a very very similar way. Each person very, very similar to the other.
It's interesting. You mentioned Glenn Beck there, and you mentioned in the podcast as well, and it's something I think I'd seen, I'd read somewhere as well, that he's sort of done a bit of a, I don't know if it's quite a full U-turn, but he's kind of gone back on a lot of the things he's sort of said a bit, which is interesting.
Yeah, he seems to have not be pushing the conspiracy theory things quite so much, and he's gone a bit more mainstream. So he's kind of still on the right, and he's still pushing the same types of conservative viewpoints that he had before. But he doesn't seem to be like he used to draw these big diagrams and say, here's Obama connected to Acorn, which is connected to Louis Farrakhan, which is connected to the Illuminati or whatever. So he would do these kind of ridiculous connection diagrams, which seemed to make sense to him and to his followers, but really were just kind of nonsense. And I haven't really, I can't say I've been following Glenn Beck, so I don't know exactly what he does now, but, John would be a better person to talk to about this. He's apologized for his past actions, which he saw as being rather divisive. And he's kind of, moved into being a more conventional commentator now, but still, more right wing than the average person.
But I think the reason I found that interesting is because there's sort of you talk to like John in your podcast, and he's someone who believed in conspiracy theories, and then he managed to escape the rabbit hole, as you put it in your book. But with Glenn Beck, but there's not an extra layer of with Glenn Beck. I feel like there's an extra layer of like he's also got all his listeners and fans that are probably into the same thing, and I imagine by maybe apologizing for certain things he said, it might alienate some of his fans, which I sort of think sometimes with people like Alex Jones, he's buried himself so deep, he's deeply entrenched now, that even if he wanted to get out of it, he can't really now, you know what I mean?
Yeah. That's true. It's like it's difficult to reinvent yourself. People do it though. If you look at Joe Rogan, he used to be much more of a believer in conspiracy theories. Like on his podcast, not many years ago, he was promoting moon landing hoax. Like he was saying that we never went to the moon. And now he thinks we did. He just thinks that perhaps NASA has edited a few photographs to make them look better, or maybe faked a couple of photographs. But he basically thinks that we went to the moon. And, he used to be a 9/11 truther to a large degree. And now it's, much less. And you'll see in the comments section of the videos where he has me on, or other debunkers or skeptics, you will see people accusing him of being a paid government shill. And he says, people will say, Joe's gone over to the dark side, unsubscribe. So he is losing some listeners because of his change. However, he has the #1 podcast in the world. So it's not like it was a bad thing for him. But he moved more into the mainstream, and he actually gained a huge following, and maybe he lost his more extreme fan base, because he could actually move to a broader fan base.
I guess like you say, it works both ways, doesn't it? Because now, I mean, I've listened to Joe Rogan for quite a while, but it did used to sort of, it was interesting to a point. Like I find it interesting when he has like someone like Eddie Bravo on his show, who, for anyone who doesn't listen to Joe Rogan, he's one of Eddie Bravo's. Eddie Bravo is like one of Joe Rogan's friends. He's involved in martial arts like Joe Rogan is, and he's I think he's a flat earther, and he's
a flat earther, yes.
And I find listening to them talk interesting to a point, and then it almost reaches a point where I can't deal with it anymore, if you see what I mean. When someone's got that extreme of a view and sort of doesn't seem to want to listen to reason, it's sort of quite hard to listen to. So I guess by Joe Rogan sort of stepping back into the more mainstream, he sort of picks up people like me that might, find it a bit.
Well, also his early audience was a lot to do with the martial arts back then. When I first went on his podcast, it was like episode 580 something, which was years ago now. And after that, I got a whole bunch of followers on Twitter, but they were like 90% mixed martial arts fans. So I got all these followers who, nothing to do really with what I was saying. They weren't like skeptics or conspiracy theorists. They were MMA guys. And that, I think, he still has a certain core audience, which is the MMA stuff. And he still does MMA episodes. But, that's shrunk a little bit. It's still there, but now there's this huge, vast audience that he has from all the other people he has on. And because he's so large and influential, he can get anybody he wants on his podcast, which is a good thing to have.
I was listening to you on some other podcast. I can't remember his name now. I think it was John X Army, I think he was called.
Yeah, John X Army.
And he seemed like a conspiracy guy to some extent.
Mm-hmm. An interesting chap.
Was that a genuine interesting chap, or? All right.
No, he is generally an interesting chap. It's hard to figure out in a way. He's a guy who's his podcast he's kind of started by pointing his infrared camera at the night sky to spot UFOs. And he kind of got a following from doing that. And then he got into prepping, like survivalism, like, what 5 things do you need to survive the zombie apocalypse? And he does podcasts on that, and he's got a following from that. And that's kind of developed into conspiracy theory type things. But he contacted me, and he told me he really loved the book, and he thought it was great, and he's going to share it to all his fans because it's great for debunking conspiracy theories. But then, like a few days later, he's on his show promoting conspiracy theories, and I can't figure out whether he's got this kind of mixed personality, or is just basically has a personality that he puts forward for his podcast. Right. Like he's not really this person, because he doesn't really come across, when I talk to him offline, as being such a hardcore conspiracy theorist. He seems quite reasonable, but then he goes online and he's kind of ranting about chemtrails. So,
it was interesting. It was
really
interesting actually listening to that, because not knowing anything about him before I found the video, he seemed fairly reasonable. I mean, you could tell straight away he was obviously into conspiracies, because he says that up front. But he seemed pretty reasonable when he was talking to you. And then I was just scrolling through the video titles, and they seemed fairly extreme, which is interesting. But I think it was in that video. You said everyone, and this is just, I wrote it down, so it's probably not a direct quote, but it's everyone believes in some sort of conspiracy was your sort of overarching point.
Yeah.
And so I guess I was wondering, as the guy who is debunking conspiracy theories, what conspiracies you tend to believe in more than others?
Well, I think, that's kind of a common question, like what conspiracy theories are real. And I opened the introduction of my book starts with the words, the conspiracies are very real, of course, because we know that there's all kinds of conspiracies going on. We know that there's corruption in the world, like in the business world and in government, there's corruption. People collude to do things, and that's not a reference to Donald Trump or anything. People just collude on all manner of things. They you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours, or here's some information that might help you out. So there are these conspiracies going on, and I put conspiracies on a spectrum of how extreme they are. One end you've got like the Queen is a child-eating alien from another dimension.
So that's the reasonable end, and then
that's the reasonable end. It's obvious she is really. Look at her. All right, so that's the extreme end, along with things like flat Earth and the Mandela effect, where people think that there are overlapping timelines and there's clues in children's cartoons and things like that. Then there's less extreme things like chemtrails, which are still a ridiculous conspiracy theory, but they're kind of technologically plausible, and you can kind of imagine that something like that might happen. And then there's more reasonable things like there's 9/11 conspiracy theories. There's a whole range of those. There are actually very extreme 9/11 conspiracy theories, like saying that the towers were blown up with beams of light from space. And then there's ones of pre-planted explosives, which are slightly more plausible. Then there's that the attacks were organized by elements within the United States government. And then there's ones where the people in the United States government knew the attacks were going to happen, but they didn't do it. So you got this whole range of possible conspiracies for this one topic. So if someone says they're a 9/11 truther, you can't immediately write them off entirely because you don't know exactly where they are on this spectrum. And I put myself usually not at 0 on the spectrum of conspiracy theories, usually at about a 1 or a 1.5 out of 10. And this means that I believe that there is corruption in industry and that there are things like the drug industry, the pharmaceutical industry, for example, is trying to maximize profits by doing illegal things and conspiring about it. In the States recently, there was a drug company, and the owners of it were just convicted of some kind of racketeering or something for selling OxyContin to pharmacists to basically distribute it to drug dealers, and they were making millions of dollars from doing this. And these are conspiracies that obviously exist, but before we knew about them, they were just existing in theory. Like, how is there so much of this drug available? What's the theory that somebody's pushing it or something? So there are definitely conspiracies that are real. Now there are some theories, there are some events that happen which are definitely a conspiracy one way or another. And it's kind of like you get two competing conspiracy theories. A few months ago, there was a thing on Russian media, on RT, where RT, Russia Today, did this series of stories over about a month almost, which was saying that the United States was going to do a faked chemical attack on a town, I think in Syria. And they went into a huge amount of detail, RT did. They said that John Bolton had said this, and this was actually going to a secret message to these Kurdish rebels in Syria, and these people were going to fake this chemical attack, and the chemical weapons had been delivered to a certain town. And this thing went on for weeks, almost a month, I think. And then what happened with that is that nothing happened. There was no chemical attack. RT just stopped talking about it, and then it kind of went away. So there's two possibilities there. Either there was a real conspiracy by the American government to do a kind of false flag chemical weapons attack in Syria and blame it on the Russians, which is what the Russians were claiming, or Russia made up this entire thing as a way of smearing the Americans. So depending on who you believe, you've got a conspiracy theory one way or the other. So there's definitely was a conspiracy there.
Yes. Yeah.
Either there was this thing, or the Russians made up the whole thing. So, you don't know which one it is. I would tend to believe that the Russians made up the whole thing. But people who are more friendly to Russia would say, it's obviously Russia discovered this plot by the Americans to do some kind of false flag attack, which is the type of thing that they do, which we know because they did false flags on 9/11. So if you've got people who are very conspiracy oriented, they're going to believe the Russians. Yes. But really, it's a conspiracy theory either way.
When you're presented with a conspiracy theory, because there's new ones popping up all the time. If there's ever a major disaster event, attack, conspiracy theories pop up. As someone who looks into them and debunks a lot of stuff and tries to find evidence for a lot of stuff, are there sort of certain trends that you can see that when a theory pops up, you can sort of easily categorize it in your mind about, well, this is on the more, if we're using that scale, this is more of an 8 out of 10 in terms of extremity rather than a 2 out of 10. You know, this is fairly plausible sort of theory.
Yeah, well, with things like school shootings, for example, or any kind of mass shooting, you often will get people saying things like, you know, this person in the background is the same as the person in the background in another.
You see that a lot,
shooting.
actually.
You see that a lot, and it's a clue that, you know, these are just people who are just like grasping at straws. Because whenever you look into any of these cases where it's supposedly the same crisis actors, they call them, if you look at high resolution photos of them, you can tell they're not the same person. So they're just taking things from like low resolution video, and they are like saying, you know, this is the same person. So there are certain things like that come up again and again, that they're saying, you know, that this is the evidence, and then you look into the evidence, and the evidence is crap. So if it's something like that, you can, I almost don't even bother looking into those anymore.
Also, the idea as well that if you were going to do that, why would you hire the same bunch of actors? That's the thing. You'd hire different actors.
Yeah, well, I suppose that ties into one of the things about conspiracy theories is if you have a large number of people, it's harder to keep a secret.
True. Yeah.
So you could say that these conspiracists that are actually doing the math, and they think, oh well, people won't recognize this person. We'll just put a fake ears on them or something like that. We'll reuse them again. But you know, a lot of the conspiracy theories come around because there isn't really any evidence for what happened straight away. So there's kind of this void. And sometimes the void lasts a long time. Like, for example, the shootings in Las Vegas from like a year or so ago. A guy rented a hotel room and he shot at a country music festival across the road, and he killed like 50 people. And no reason came out for why he did it. And there still hasn't been any reason that came out for why he did it. And the obvious reason is just that he was a sad, crazy old man who wanted to do something that something that he thought would be dramatic and fulfilling for him before he died, because he killed himself afterwards. So it's just a suicide type thing. But because there's this void of an explanation, people rush in to fill it with possible theories. And the theory there, in America, we have a big, gun lobby, pro-gun lobby. They're always saying that the reason that this happened was that they want to take away our guns so they can take away our freedoms and then usher in some kind of slave economy. And so every time you get a school shooting or any kind of shooting, you will get the claim that it's some kind of device to take away our guns. But then nothing ever happens. There was the Sandy Hook shooting a while ago, and there was almost no change whatsoever in terms of gun legislation. America's got a deeply entrenched love of guns, and it's really going to be pretty much impossible to make any significant changes to the gun law. We've got the Second Amendment, and we've got Supreme Court cases that have enshrined and codified the interpretation of the Second Amendment. It would be really, really difficult. You need a constitutional amendment to actually do anything about guns.
Which isn't going to happen.
And it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen because it's not politically viable for anybody in the foreseeable future. Probably not for like 50 to 100 years. And by then, we're all going to be ruled by robots anyway, so it won't really matter. So, the theories don't make sense on their face. So it's kind of difficult to. But what I tend to do is just look at what they are claiming as evidence. And don't just try to say things like, oh, that's a ridiculous conspiracy theory, which is an easy thing to say and it's true, but it doesn't help. It doesn't convince people if you just dismiss their conspiracy theory. So you got to look at what they're actually saying is evidence and then point out, this is what's wrong with the evidence. This isn't that person. The guns were not taken away after Sandy Hook. This guy actually did do it. He was a crazy guy. So you look at the evidence and point out what's wrong with the evidence.
There was a tweet I saw on your Twitter that you saw. I think you were posting a headline from an article about people not believing in vaccinations, and I think you said something about how when people say to you, why bother trying to disprove the flat Earth, and you say, well, it's if you don't try and disprove that sort of extreme conspiracy theory, then people who believe in that, it's easier for them to believe in that they shouldn't take their vaccines, get their children vaccinated.
Yeah.
And I just sort of wanted to explore that idea with you, if you don't.
Yeah, no, that's that particular. It was a clip I took from a Facebook group that I was a member of, a Flat Earth Facebook group, and the person was, I can't remember what it was exactly, but it was some kind of ridiculous claim about vaccines, that they're poison basically, and we know that vaccines are safe and they're very good public health thing, and they save many, many lives. And when people don't take them, then they end up getting things like measles outbreaks everywhere, which kills children. So people should be taking vaccines. But vaccine as a conspiracy theory, like Big Pharma is just covering up the harm of vaccine, is very low down on the conspiracy scale. It's like, it's a 2 or 3 or, 1, 2, 3. It's like right down there. Because it's basically a simple thing, like the big companies have covered up research so they can maximize profits. It's probably a bit more ridiculous when you actually get into the details of it, but that's what most people think of it as, being a fairly straightforward conspiracy theory.
And a surprising amount of people believe that as well. Like a surprising amount of people that
a lot of people
wouldn't expect to believe that sort of thing.
Yeah, and it crosses the entire range of people, like rich people and left-right people. There's liberal towns in California that are very rich, where half the kids are not vaccinated because there's a bunch of granola moms, they call them here, kind of hippie, left-wing, natural type people who think that vaccines are bad. But the point with the conspiracy theories and the flat Earth is way on one end of the spectrum, and vaccines are at the other end of the spectrum. So if someone believes the Earth is flat, that means they're pretty much going to believe any conspiracy theory that's less extreme than that conspiracy theory. I say that people divide their personal conspiracy spectrums with a line of demarcation, where on one side everything is ridiculous, and on the other side everything is reasonable. So if you think that, say, chemtrails is a reasonable conspiracy theory, but flat Earth is a ridiculous conspiracy theory, you've drawn a line between chemtrails and flat Earth. But you're going to believe everything that's downstream of chemtrails. You're going to believe that 9/11 was an inside job. You're going to believe that the school shootings were fake. You're going to believe that vaccines are a plot by Big Pharma to maximize profit. And you're probably going to believe that fluoride in the water is really bad for you and is just a trick by the government to, sedate people or something like that. So if you want to do things, if you want to change people's minds on topics that are very, very important and have real consequences, like vaccines, where people actually die because of it, then you've got to kind of shift their line closer to that topic, shift them down the spectrum. So you actually have to address flat Earth with a person before you can get down to even chemtrails, and then you have to address chemtrails, and then you've got to address their 9/11 truth. And then as you get them closer to where they think the vaccine conspiracy is, then you can start to talk about vaccines. But if they're at flat Earth, you can't talk to them. So you've got to start with flat Earth.
It's interesting you say that, because it makes a lot of sense when you say it, but my initial reaction would it be the other way around, if you see what I mean? It would be, we're never going to get them off this flat Earth horse that they're on, so we'll just do the easy ones first and work our way up to flat Earth. But it's interesting you talk about bringing them back down. It makes a lot of sense when you say it. Why
would you think that flat Earth, it would be easier or harder than vaccines? Now, it seems like it's a straightforward thing, but the science of vaccines is just as complicated as the science of flat Earth.
Yeah, true.
But vaccines are generally accepted as safe by most people in the country. A majority of the people in the country, but perhaps not a huge majority. But flat Earth is a tiny minority of people. Most people dismiss flat Earth immediately because it's such a ridiculous sounding idea, and we all know the Earth is round. But if you actually try to explain one or the other, it's quite tricky to explain why the Earth is actually round. If someone accepts the idea that all of science and history has been a lie, which is what you have to do to accept that the Earth is flat, then it's very easy to dismiss anything you say. You can say, oh, we have photos of the Earth from space, and they will say, oh, they're just fake. And so
you can't. How do you respond
to that? You can't get through to it. And so if you say, oh, vaccines are safe, we have the studies to prove it, then they're going to say, oh, those studies are fake.
Yeah.
So how do you get around that? You can't say, well, go and do your own vaccine studies. But you can tell people to go out and take photographs of the moon and see that it stays the same size throughout the day, or do some triangulation with the shadows, or look at the International Space Station. You can actually do things with flat Earth that are practical and can actually move people towards science and towards a bit more of a trust of established science, which you can't really do with vaccines.
Did you see that Netflix documentary, the Beyond the Curve one, which is about flat Earth?
Yes, I saw that. It was fascinating.
And there was that bit where they bought the really expensive, I think it was like the laser gyroscope.
Yeah, ring laser gyroscope.
And it was to measure the Earth moving a certain amount of degrees, which proves that the Earth is rotating, therefore it would be a globe.
Yeah.
And they obviously found that it was rotating, and then they still chose not to believe it. When someone is of that nature, where they are and you touched upon it there about, if you believe that all of history and science are a lie, then how do you get through to someone like that? Is it hard for you not to get very frustrated when you talk to people? Because you come across as like you're so reasonable with people, and I wish I could be more like that. I try and stay very reasonable in discussions with people, but it reaches a point where you're just like, well, if you can't, you know what I mean?
I get frustrated too sometimes, but what I found is that getting frustrated doesn't really help.
No.
So you have to kind of override your natural reactions. Yeah. When somebody says something that's absolutely ridiculous, someone will say, we all have our own personal holographic sun, which is why it looks the way it does, which is just a meaningless, ridiculous, insane-sounding thing, and your reaction would be like, that's just stupid. But if you said, well, what do you mean by that, and how does that work, and how does that account for different people seeing different things, and if you actually get people to think about what they're saying and kind of delve into a bit more detail, it generally works better than just
calling them stupid.
Ridiculous. You could act, well, not act, but you could be genuinely puzzled. You could be like, what does that even mean? Explain that to me. But to get the ring laser gyroscope thing, a lot of flat Earth people will do experiments that they think will prove the Earth is flat, and the results end up being consistent with a round Earth. But the thing is, they know deep in their hearts, they know that the Earth is flat. So because of this, they set out to figure out what's wrong with their experiment. Now, this is something that would actually work both ways. If someone was, a globe Earth believer, a conventional scientist, and they did an experiment to measure the curve of the Earth, and the curve of the Earth turned out to be 0 in their results, they wouldn't immediately turn around and become a flat earther. They would think that there's something wrong with their experiments. So it's not an unreasonable reaction for someone to think that there's something wrong with the experiments if they deeply believe in a certain reality. So you have to accept that one experiment isn't going to convince people. Maybe 2 or 3 or even 10 different types of things aren't going to convince people. But I think that eventually the weight of the evidence will convince people, and that it will become clear to them that you've got all this evidence that the Earth is round, you've got no real evidence that the Earth is flat. So which one are you going to go with? Are you going to just stick with this just because you prefer it, or are you going to go with the one that has all the evidence? And it's something you just got to keep chipping away at their false beliefs and the false things that they think of as facts, and supplying them with information that they're missing. So you correct the false beliefs and you supply them with useful information to fill the void.
the flat Earth thing. It seems like it's gotten a lot of traction recently, and I don't know if that's just me not being aware of the, flat Earth being a big thing before. But is it correct to think like it's sprung up again recently, and it's for some reason it's gotten popular again?
Yeah, it started around 2016. There was just a surge of interest. There was a few YouTube videos. There was guys like Eric Debay is one of the famous flat earthers from that time. He did a bunch of flat earth videos, and people started passing them around. And then what happened was, at some point, the media got interested in it because a couple of vaguely famous people tweeted about it.
Yeah, like Kyrie Irving, the basketball player, and stuff like that.
Yeah, and some of them were joking, and some of them were semi-serious, and some of them were just making some kind of philosophical point. But then the media was, this is fascinating, and let's look into it. And then another thing that happened was lots of debunkers got really interested in it. If you look up Flat Earth on YouTube, you'll see there's scores of debunking videos because it's fun. It's a fun thing to debunk. But I think the problem is that these debunking videos, to a certain degree, are fueling the fire. If you've got all these people engaging in an argument against something, some people will see that as being some kind of organized attempt to silence them or to have propaganda against them. And so they start to see it as being this battle. So the Flat Earth community has kind of, over the last 2 years, has kind of evolved into this set of warring factions. There's like 10 to 20 debunkers making these quite good debunking videos. And then there's like 10 to 20 flat earthers making these counter videos. And then they get together. They know each other. The debunkers and the flat earthers, they know each other. And they get on each other's podcasts and Google Hangouts and do videos together. And they do these screencast sessions, which last for hours. Where they go over the same points again and again. Oh, this mountain shouldn't be visible. Yes, it should. And here's the math. Well, your math is wrong. Math is a tool of the Illuminati. Your photos are fake. And we've gone over that. And they just go over the same things over and over again. And progress is generally not made. And I've been on some of these hangouts, and they're not always very productive. They often devolve into shouting matches because you got two sides.
To each other.
Yeah, exactly. You got two sides that don't want to listen to each other, and they're just both trying to convince the other side. It's like if you were in a court, and all you had in the courtroom was the two lawyers like shouting at each other. This is my evidence, and this is my evidence, and all they're doing is presenting their evidence to the other person and not listening to the other person.
Well, that's a bit like. I mean, you see that with stuff like Brexit. You see that like in political conversations as well, don't you? Like Brexit over here, it's just descended into I'm right, you're wrong. No, I'm right, you're wrong. And there doesn't seem to be any sort of middle ground in terms of. It's very hard to have a discussion with someone now, whatever side you're on, because no one wants to listen to the other person because they think they're right.
Yeah.
Do you worry about? You say about debunkers like adding flame to the fire. Do you worry about that yourself with the stuff you do?
Yeah, I do, and it's a constant thing in the back of my mind. Yeah, what's the net effect of what I'm doing? Is it a net good? And it's kind of hard to measure. And I think the people who could measure it are the big tech companies like Facebook and YouTube. They could actually, see, if someone's watching a certain debunking video, does it actually have an effect? They could actually measure this thing. But because of privacy concerns, they don't do that type of thing, or at least they don't tell us that they're doing it. But I don't know. All I have to go by is kind of like individuals. And a lot of individuals have told me that, my debunking stuff has helped them personally. So in that sense, it's worth it because you're helping people, real individual people, and you change their lives essentially. Before they were paranoid outcasts essentially in the eyes of society, and now they become people who have a much more grounded view of reality, and they're happier, and they realize it's like they have a second awakening. People have an awakening when they discover the rabbit hole and they think, oh my God, like all this stuff is going on underneath the surface and I didn't know about it. And then, perhaps years later, they have another awakening, which is, oh, all that stuff was just bullshit. And, real science is actually really interesting, and real politics is actually really interesting. And that's, the stuff that I'm going to focus on from now on. So the fact that I get people out of the rabbit hole is great. But, like I said, like I started doing chemtrails debunking in 2006, 13 years ago. And it's not like chemtrails have dropped off. There are still lots of people who believe in chemtrails, and a lot of the people who promoted chemtrails back then are still promoting chemtrails. So it's a tricky thing to know whether you're doing a net benefit to society. I hope I am, and I think I am, but I don't know what is working exactly and what isn't working, and it would be good to try to figure that out.
Is there times when you see a conspiracy pop up, and you sort of mentioned it earlier with the stuff about, oh, that crisis actor is the same in that one, and you sort of said, well, it's not really worth you sort of even pointing out anymore because, that's just... are there theories that you see that you're like, this isn't worth my time because I don't want to encourage people towards it, if you see what I mean?
Yeah, well, I think with that now, it's not just that it's not. I don't want to encourage people. With the shootings now, mainstream media is aware that these conspiracy theories come up straight away, and mainstream media, a lot of mainstream websites, and perhaps not like ABC News and things like that. But a lot of mainstream websites will immediately start debunking these conspiracy theories that come up. So it's almost like it's moved beyond this little niche debunker field into the mainstream. And people are aware that these things come up as conspiracy theories. And so they put their people on them. And, people are interested in conspiracy theories. So they start debunking it. There was no point like the Notre Dame fire. There was loads of conspiracy theories about that. They said it was like, set to blame Muslims, or Muslims did it, or it was some kind of distraction from Brexit or distraction from the Yellow Jacket, Yellow Vest movement. So obviously these things crop up. But I didn't bother doing any debunking at all of those because it's such a big event and there was so much media attention on it. And the media is aware that these false flag things come up. The media will start debunking those things straight away. So I focus on things that the media doesn't cover, like Flat Earth and 9/11 and chemtrails. Another one was the forest fires we had here in California. There was lots of conspiracy theories saying they were set by laser beams from space. So I did some debunking on that.
Why is it always laser beams from space?
Because they're fun. Like sharp lasers. That's true. It's a fun science fiction thing that young people would be into. It's like a cartoon thing in a way.
One thing I wanted to ask you, because you get a lot of people accusing you that you're a government shill. Yeah. That you're paid by the government to do this. Do you get like a sort of a lot of? I mean, I see it in like YouTube comments when you're on other people's podcasts and stuff. But like, I don't know, like, and do you get like a lot of general sort of harassment, abuse, sort of targeted at you in that way online?
No, really, no.
Really?
I'm actually kind of surprised I don't get more. But I'm not that well known. So it's there's lots of people who have much bigger followings than me. I only have like 4,000 followers on YouTube and like 6,000 on Twitter, which is more than average. But for like a personality, it's a very, very small amount. So I'm kind of niche. So there's really only a small number of people who know who I am. And so I don't get very many things in terms of like death threats or anything like that. I have a hate mail folder in my mail thing, and I only had to put in like one every couple of weeks or so. Let me have a look where it is now.
Which is still more than an average person.
Well, yes, the average person doesn't generally get hate mail, but yeah, I can't even find my hate mail now. Let me just search for hate mail here. Label hate mail. So the last one I got was on March the 27th. So I haven't had an email thing since March the 27th. That's what it says. It says, I don't know who or how much they pay you, but you're a mindless coward. You have no idea. A mindless coward. You have no idea how to research. Everything on your website is bullshit. You're a joke. Everyone laughs at. It's a commonly known fact that geoengineering is taking place, and you are an effing moron. What a total idiot. So that was the last hate mail I got back in March. Right. I get a few things on Twitter and YouTube and stuff, but just ignore them because they're just people mouthing off.
Yeah. I just ask because the conversation I had with David Noah, who's not generally a conspiracy debunker. I think he's writing something about conspiracies, so we talked about it a bit. But he more deals with sort of right-wing extremism, and he's like a liberal journalist, and he seems to get a lot of he gets targeted a lot by that sort of group of people. So I sort of wondered if it was the same for you, but I'm glad to hear it's not.
No, it's a sign of success in a way. If you become famous, then you're gonna get a lot more hate mail. I'm sure Joe Rogan gets a whole bunch because millions of people listen to him. But so far, not so much. And I think because I do keep things very reasonable and polite, and I don't get involved in personal fights with people, I try to always look on the charitable side of whatever the other person's position is. So if someone starts being rude to me, I just ignore them or just reply politely to them if it's not too impolite. So.
It's quite hard. It's quite hard to be aggressive with someone when they're just being polite back, I suppose. And this may invalidate this question, but I thought it was just in terms of doing this sort of stuff, being because in a sense you're down the same rabbit hole as a lot of these conspiracy theorists, but you're in there looking at it in a different way. Mm-hmm. Does it take a toll on your sort of mental health? Maybe an extreme way to put it. I'm not going to imply that it depresses you or anything like that. But does it take a toll on you in any way, like having to be in this rabbit hole quite a lot?
Not really. Although I would say it is sometimes a bit depressing when you realize the scale of things, like just how many people believe in certain conspiracy theories and how little things have changed over a long period of time. I think there are the stuff that I'm interested in, though, isn't that depressing. If you talk about depressing stuff, it's going to be hate movements like white power, white nationalism, and anti-Islam type stuff, or homophobic type things where people are talking about lynching people. You don't get that in the chemtrail movement. You don't get it in the 9/11 movement, really. They're generally very polite people. The 9/11 people, especially people like architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth, they're a bunch of polite old men on the large part. So it's it's hard to get depressed. I am a little bit sad sometimes that there's so many people who believe in these things, but it's not that bad. The worst thing is the shootings, especially the school shootings, obviously, when you have children involved. And when you're dealing with people who are saying, show me the photos of the children lying dead in the corridors. Why wasn't there more blood from the children? That's very disheartening and quite disturbing sometimes. But, it's, we know that the school shootings happened, and someone talking about it doesn't make them, happen worse. It's just this person has this gross misunderstanding of what's going on, which is a bit disturbing. But I'm trying to help this person. I'm trying to help this person see that these shootings did actually happen and they weren't a plot to take away their guns, and that there are more important things that they should be focusing on. So you try to look at the positive side of things.
Do you find that there's and without wanting to sort of attack either side of the political spectrum at all, but do you find there's it tends to lean in one direction more than another? Or I know I did see you say about a lot of the people who believe in 9/11 were actually tended to be Democrats because they didn't like the Republican
yes there's
a
theory that conspiracy theorists are often the underdogs in a situation, but now things have kind of shifted a bit with Trump, which is interesting, and that there's a huge amount of conspiracy theorists who support Trump, even though he's the person in power who in theory would be in charge of all these conspiracies, because they still view Trump as being on the outside. So they view him as being persecuted by the deep state, and so they don't think he's in charge of the government entirely. He thinks there's this deep government that is working against him. So there's all these conspiracy theories like the QAnon conspiracy theory, which are basically things to support Trump. But I think there's different flavors of conspiracy theories. Things like the vaccine conspiracies are perhaps a bit more left wing. It's kind of more people who think that GMOs are bad. And these kind of low level conspiracies. And the more middle, slightly up the spectrum, there you get the right wing conspiracies, which are like the QAnon thing. That there's this plot by some kind of I think your guest talked about cultural Marxism. And that's essentially is a right-wing conspiracy theory that the Jews are trying to impose socialism on people, Marxism. So there are definitely conspiracy theories that have a distinct flavor. But when you get into things like 9/11 now and chemtrails, there isn't really a political slant to it. They just distrust the government no matter who's in power. So it's kind of a bipartisan thing when you get to extreme conspiracy theories. And if you think the Queen is a child-eating, shape-shifting alien, then politics has nothing at all to do with it. You just have a very strange view of the world.
So there you have it, Mick West. My thanks to Mick for giving his time to the show. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Please do join me again soon for another edition of The Last Line. I do apologise for the little gap in the running order for a while. We've been doing some stuff behind the scenes, so but we're back, and more will be coming very, very soon. So thank you once again for joining me, and until next time, I've been James Alban, and this is The Last Line.